Awesome. So team, my name is Vinod Aravindakshan. I work in, again, just a reminder that I work in the Bay Area as a recruiter for Cisco. I will look after HR. And there were a bunch of topics which each IIT had identified as ways by which alumni can talk back to the students. So we had a discussion last week, 2 weeks earlier, but now the discussion is going to be around more of the career options after B.Tech, after doing a master's degree, after doing work and so on. So that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on today. Meanwhile, give me a second, please. So I created some links just to make sure that you folks are able to see this material in terms of what I've posted online. I also keep seeing some very interesting links, which I'm trying to post on a regular basis. Whatever I find on Facebook or something which you folks would find interesting, that's what I try to share. So again, I'll share these links with you later, but FYI that there are ways to share information. So I want to let you folks know that we actually talked across IITs and came up with a list of questions which the students wanted alumni to give feedback on. So last session, just 2 weeks back, we talked about the guidance in terms of joining a new IIT and how that helps, what are the pros and cons. So for today's session, I'm just going to go down the same order in terms of what we have. So basically, I want to cover this career opportunities after B.Tech and opportunities after doing a job for a couple of years. Maybe I'll also touch on other questions like, I know last time we ran out of time, but there were some other questions around what sort of options are available after doing a master's degree, what sort of experience, or what sort of career opportunities are available after working for a couple of years. So I will touch on these topics. And then in another 2 weeks, again, I'll touch on the third topic, which is about how to plan a career. So I'll just go through this one by one. So folks, this is kind of a quick way to summarize how we want to look at all these options in terms of there's just so many options out there, right? I mean, you may want to work for a couple of years, you may want to go for higher studies. So I just feel that sort of like a framework will help you folks understand like how to like think the big picture about these topics. The first one about further studies is that you can clearly see that you can do a bunch of things, right? I mean, you can do an MBA abroad, you can go for a PhD degree, you can do an MS, or you can do even an MBA in India. But again, what you do at the end of the day basically depends on where your skills are, what your strengths are. And there's also other factors to keep in mind, like things like your grades, your communication skills, your verbal communication, your written communication skills. These things are super important because it plays a very important role when, for example, you're applying for like a PhD or MBA abroad. This is very, very important. Your grades, the papers you publish, your test scores, these are all very important. So when you give tests, you get a very good feedback in terms of are you cut out for doing, say, a PhD course, or are you cut out for doing an MBA course? So there are things which play out there. In terms of master's programs, again, the thing to keep in mind is that if you could do an MBA in India, MBA programs in India are not cheap. They are also pretty expensive. They're, for example, an IIM degree costs around like 20 lakhs. So those are things to keep in mind when somebody is jumping into a degree. And the average compensation when you finish an MBA degree is also close to like 15 to 20 lakhs a year. So the question is, would you want to invest so much upfront? So these are questions you want to keep in mind. You also want to get some work experience before you go for an MBA degree. So if you're an undergraduate student, I think all these options are open to you. So you can look at all these options I've thrown up under further studies, or you can look at work and look at all these options. If you are a master's degree student graduating from IIT, I don't think really your options change a lot. You can actually still like go for an MBA abroad, do a PhD and so on. But I would say the only place where you may find lesser opportunities is after doing an MTech in IIT, right? Would you want to do, say, an MS abroad? I mean, there are a lot of people who have done it, but is that something you want to do? So those are questions you need to ask. After doing an MTech in IITs, would you want to do an MBA in India? Again, there are a lot of folks who have done it, but again, is that something you want to do? You may want to ask that question. But typically, there are quite a few examples of people who do an MS degree and go for an MBA degree, right? I mean, that's very common. Even if you look at a guy like Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO of Google, after his undergrad degree in, I think, in material science and metallurgy from IIT Kharagpur, He went on to do his master's from the US and went on to do his MBA. So doing an MS and MBA has become a pretty common norm for a lot of IIT students. Even the CEO of Microsoft, if you look at his career, he did do an MS and do an MBA. So people have done that. But there's also a lot of very successful alumni from IITs who have straight gone for MBA from the IIMs or other schools and done a good job. So it really depends on what you want to do at the end of the day. If you feel you're cut out for business, then you can jump into it. Or if you feel that you're cut out for maybe working in a global multinational company, then probably working abroad makes a lot of sense. So in terms of work, the things to keep in mind is that, again, there are a bunch of options, right? I mean, you could get into computer science jobs, which are very lucrative. And in a way, I would actually say that computer science jobs are even more lucrative than doing an MBA abroad. So it's very good. You could choose a finance consulting career straight out of your undergrad or work for a couple of years there, which will make your profile much better. Then you can do an MBA and again get into a more senior position in finance and consulting. The key thing to keep in mind is that if you're looking at companies like, say, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, all these companies, you really need an MBA to get ahead in the consulting industry. So again, those are things you want to keep in mind. But again, if you want to work in, say, core jobs, public sector jobs, try for civil services, I don't think you basically need to do a master's degree. Your undergrad degree should be pretty much enough. So any questions on this slide before I proceed? But you folks always have the option of going to Slido and putting in any questions if you want to, so that I can have a look at it if you don't feel comfortable talking aloud. Okay, folks, I'll just move on to the next slide. Yeah, I see one comment here that startups can be added to the list. Yes, startups can definitely be added to the list. So when I say analytics, right, I mean, there are a bunch of companies which recruit for analytics, especially startups. So when I said analytics, I kind of meant that space of startup and analytics. That was my idea. I would say that the reason for joining a startup is that if you're willing to take a lot of risks early on in your life and get huge rewards, I think it's a good time to join a startup. Like, you don't need always to found a startup. You don't need to be the co-founder or a founder. You can also work in a startup and get very good experience. The advantages of working in a startup is that you get enormous exposure. You are not just focused on one domain, but you actually get to work on different functions, and you can quickly get a feel of what makes it interesting. But the cons of working in a startup is that most of the startups, like 90 to 95% of the startups, are not successful. They shut down within 1 to 2 years. So you may find yourself that firstly, you may not be paid well. Startups are not known for paying well. They pay in stock, so that you work for stock, and if the stock appreciates, you do well, but the compensation by itself is not great. So that's something you may want to keep in mind. The other cons is that it might shut down after 1 or 2 years, and then you may again be looking out for a job. So again, those are the risks. But if the company does very well, and if you get into that space, you can actually make a killing in terms of, if you look at one of my YouTube channels, I'd actually put up a video with one of the alumni from IIT Madras, a guy called Srikant Sundararajan. He actually advocates that a lot of IIT students join startups as much as possible. And he gives some examples of people who join startups at the right time, and they've made actually millions of dollars in terms of being super successful because the company went IPO, they made a killing. But again, it depends on your risk appetite in terms of what is the right time to join a startup. So I also want to give you folks an overall understanding of how the market is in terms of what is compensation, because I think a large part of the careers you choose is also guided by the fact that what is the compensation available in the market. So I want to point out that Zeno, which is a consulting company which has done a lot of analysis of the Indian job market. And I want to let you folks know that, like, based on a recent analysis done, I think it was done last year, this is, again, this is not just applicable for IITs, but it also applies across engineering schools. Typically, they see that the average B.Tech salary is typically 3.5 lakhs. But when it comes to IT sector, an average student with a BE, B.Tech degree can end up getting almost double the compensation at 7 lakhs. Similarly, with an ME, M.Tech degree from IIT's, average IT salary is 9.2 lakhs. So there clearly is a differentiation in terms of going in for a master's degree compared to core compensation in a core company, because the salary tends to be much bigger and better if you have a master's degree and if the company is an IT company. Again, please note that these numbers include a bunch of things like base, a one-time joining bonus. They may include stock. They may include bonus at the end of the year. The way bonus at the end of the year works is that your manager gives you an evaluation at the end of the year. If the evaluation is not good, you may not end up getting any bonus. So these numbers are pretty much variable and it's not fixed. So the Zeno article also talks about the fact that right now there is a bunch of options available to students as they look at careers. In the past, typically it has been just multinational companies. You work for startups. There are companies which tie up with service providers and working with industry. So those are one set of companies. But of late, what's happened is that there are a lot more options available. There are a lot of the tech giants who are hiring a lot of people in India. There is also a lot of Indian organizations who also ramped up the hiring efforts. There are a lot of unicorns which have come up in India. If you look at last week, there have been like 4 unicorns in India. When I say unicorn, I'm referring to a company with $1 billion of evaluation in terms of startup evaluation. So there's a lot of startups coming up in India, and I think Indian market is changing a lot. So this might be actually a great time to join a startup and get some experience in terms of working there. So options are increasing year by year. And again, having worked in a couple of big tech companies, I know that like hiring in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley and hiring in Bangalore is not very different. I think there's a fierce war for there's a competition for top talent, and that's exactly what drives up compensation. When there's a war for talent, the students tend to benefit, the employees tend to benefit because they get paid a lot more. Any questions before I go to the next slide? So again, based on one of the questions was that in India, right, if you do an MBA, PhD, like how much does the compensation really change? And again, this is some, again, focused numbers based on select B.Tech schools. And typically what these consulting companies find is that as you do a master's degree, there's clearly a small difference of like a couple of lakhs, like 7 lakh to 9 lakhs when it comes to a master's degree. With an MBA degree, if you do it in IIMs and the top 10, top 20, it's great. But if you don't do it from the top 20, it really is not really worth it. You can look at this here in terms of the numbers are not that high. But if you do a PhD, there can still be an appreciable jump, but that's not very different. For doing a PhD in India is not very different from doing ME, M.Tech in India. So that's just a reality of where we are. In terms of IT skills, there seems to be a big differentiation in terms of within IT skills, some sectors tend to pay more rather than the others. So if you look at some of the skills like technical support, application development, there's a certain pay attached to it. Technical support is probably the lowest in terms of pay. But when it comes to certain niche skills, it's getting really prominent in the market. So an average undergrad student in India can get a compensation of at least 12 lakhs or maybe even 15 lakhs if they have experience or skills working in sectors like cloud, data science, AI, ML, cybersecurity, and so on. See, these are really hot fields. Again, I know that this may not be applicable to students who are in the core sector, but again, I just want everyone to keep in mind that when it comes to AI, ML, even if you're in mechanical engineering, if you're in civil engineering, there are always opportunities because AI, ML is being applied, machine learning is pretty much being applied to mechanical engineering in lots of areas. So again, there's a lot of learning happening in that space. So it's very customized. So if you pick up even a little bit of coding skills, that might really help you in your career. Likewise, in civil engineering, there's a space called transportation engineering, where a lot of AI, ML techniques is being used. So again, even if you're in those sectors, you can still end up using a lot of these techniques and gain some very valuable skill sets. So I would just say that do not ignore some of these niche skill sets, because they're super hot in the market, and that might actually help you get really good jobs. I heard the placement committee coordinators of both IIT Tirupati and Palakkad tell me that some of the companies are coming to campuses saying that they want people with specifically some sort of skills in AI ML to work in mechanical engineering and to work in civil engineering. So there definitely is a demand, and as you improve some of your software exposure, you could be eligible to apply for those jobs. I also want to use this slide to point out that there is also differences between different sectors in terms of automotive sector, semiconductor sector, software industry, in terms of typically what the compensation is. So if you're looking at IITs, right, I mean, they're falling to the tier 1 schools. So if you look at it, you can see clearly that head to head, the automotive sector is, they pay well, but again, it's not very comparable to say semiconductor industry or the software industry, because compensation is not always equal. And automotive sectors probably pay around 10 to 11 lakhs, but some semiconductor industry pays from 12 to 13 lakhs. Software industry pays again 12 to 13 lakhs. So there's a little bit of variation. You can clearly get a sense of like what it means to apply to many of these companies and get these jobs. So any thoughts as you look at this slide? Any questions at the back of your mind? Okay, I have one question here saying that does the institute matter whether it's an MTech in IIT? Absolutely doesn't matter. So most of the companies which hire at IITs, they don't care whether you have an undergrad degree, a dual degree, or a master's degree. So they're very clear that they want IIT students, because I think they really get a feeling that they have an assured quality when it comes to coming to IITs and hiring. So I would just say that like in no way do companies treat the students differently. In fact, if you look at many of the Indian companies, they get a feeling that if they want students to stick around, they basically need to hire some of the master's degree students rather than do the hire the undergrads, because when you get a B.Tech student, there is always a risk that the student might leave after 1 or 2 years to say pursue an MBA degree. And that is always not helpful for companies. Companies really want stability, so they actually prefer to hire MTech students because they feel that the risk of losing them is much smaller. So I would say that they're ready to pay whatever is required to get MTech students. So there's absolutely no difference between B.Tech versus an MTech degree from IITs. And I think a lot of companies, when it comes to like the Googles, Amazons, Microsoft, they may have different roles they are recruiting for. They may have very entry level roles where they feel that having an MTech degree may be too much of an experience at that level. So they may have certain roles where they feel that having an undergrad degree is more than enough. So they may say that I just want an undergrad degree, person with an undergrad degree, a B.Tech for those sort of roles inside the company. But typically when it comes to more like sophisticated work, more technical work, clearly there's a bias towards master's degree students. There is a very interesting fact you folks may want to know that, for example, if you look at Japan, right? I mean, most of the students coming out of undergrad, 80% of them go on to do a master's degree. So doing a master's degree is super common in many, many countries. It is not very common in India. Not sure what's causing it, but if you are in Korea, if you're in Japan, I worked in Korea for a couple of years myself, and I know that doing a master's degree there is very common. People don't stop with a bachelor's degree. Even if you go to say Germany, people don't stop with a bachelor's degree. They always do a master's side by side. It's just that that doesn't happen in India. But I really think that there's absolutely no difference. The other thing to keep in mind is also that communication skills are also very, very important, because whether you have an undergrad degree or a master's degree, like the way you communicate will really make a big difference in terms of what happens to your career. So your technical skills are important. Communication is equally important. I would say the only place where you can get by without being too good in communication could be that if you're an awesome, fantastic coder, then people will not care about anything else other than your work. But in most other sections, whatever job you're in, I think improving your communication skills, your presentation skills will go a long way in terms of promotions and the way you go forward in your career. So that's something we want to keep in mind. So these are things, these are easy hacks, right? I mean, whether you have an undergrad degree from IITs or master's degree or dual degrees, if you can develop your communication skills and spend some time on it, that will help you throughout your life. So those are things you could focus on. So folks, this is something I pulled up from Michigan State University site, which is msu.edu. I've given the link at the bottom. So this gives an approximate idea of what happens to careers as people have an undergrad degree, they do an MS degree, an MBA degree, or a PhD degree in terms of how does their earning potential change. Again, this is US data, may not be very representative of India, but at least it helps you give an understanding of what happens to people as they progress through their careers. So for example, if you are in engineering, right, if you have a bachelor's degree in engineering, the average compensation in the US is around $79,000. And if you do an MS degree or an MBA degree for an engineer, there's actually not much of a difference. They tend to get paid pretty much the same. So there is no substantial difference of an MBA or MS degree for an engineer. But for example, if you're a person who's working in the space of education or humanities, your existing compensation may be very low. By doing an MBA degree, you may be able to dramatically increase the compensation. So I think those are some advantages for certain segments, but not always for engineering in the US. Likewise, if you look at the PhD programs, if you're an engineer, the average pay is around $107,000. So something to keep in mind is that when a person with MS degree gets maybe $90,000 to $100,000 as compensation, and a PhD gets maybe a small differential of around $10,000 to $7,000. What this basically means is that there's not too much of a difference between what's offered in the US for a PhD versus an MS. But yes, there's a slight difference. But please keep in mind that if you want to do a PhD in the US, it typically takes an additional 5 years after your master's degree. And there's always 5 years of opportunity costs. And again, you're living on basically subsistence wages just with the stipend you get. So these are some trade-offs, but in the long run, yes, doing a PhD may make a lot of sense for people who are experts in this space, who have a great GPA. They want to focus only on that sector as much as possible throughout their life. So for them, the PhD degrees make a lot of sense. So again, this slide is more to show you like how compensation changes as you get additional degrees. And that gives you a sense of what to shoot for. Let me pause here. Any other questions which come to your mind in terms of initial thoughts from you folks or things you may want to keep in mind? Okay, folks, I'm actually coming to the end of my presentation. I just want to open it up. I don't want this to just be a presentation. Hopefully I can answer some questions you have. I know last time there was at least 2 questions which came at me in terms of how do you get into public sector jobs? And I think the other questions was what are the options for master's students? So hopefully I answered the question around what are the options open for master's degree students. Basically, the answer is that all the options available for undergrads are open for master's degree students. The only difference is that do you want to do an MS in the US? If you already have an MTech from IIT, that's a question for you to answer. If you want to do it, you can do it, but you got to answer the question. And after an MTech degree, would you want to do an MBA degree? A lot of people do it, but do you want to do it? That's the only difference. Everything else is basically the same. Okay, folks, looks like you folks do not have any further questions, so maybe I'll stop the session here. Is there anything else you want me to touch on or things you would want me to do better for the next session? Just send me your thoughts and comments. I really appreciate it. Okay, team, thanks so much. I think I'm stopping for today and we'll again connect maybe after 2 weeks and go from there. And I'll put up these recordings on YouTube very soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Have a great Saturday.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.